we're going to see this continue to gather steam as we move forward. Undoubtedly, no matter really which way you slice it, the nearshoring trend is going to lead to a high demand for warehousing, trucking, rail, and all other sort of services in North America. I think it's a very exciting time to sort of be part of the industry.
Welcome to IWLA's live webinar, Capitalizing on Nearshoring, a case study on a rapid turnaround 3PL success story. The key takeaways you will receive from this webinar include learning more about inside the Nearshoring boom, 3PL opportunities for growth, a real-world 3PL case study about how to capitalize on nearshoring, and what you need to know about WMS and platform integrations. And now it's my pleasure to introduce our featured speakers, Sean Higgin, CEO with CartonCloud, and Reg Adams, President of Techdinamics Integrations Incorporated. And with that, I'd like to hand the presentation over to Sean.
Thanks very much, Bennett, and great to be here, guys. And thanks for taking the time out of your busy weeks to join the webinar. Thrilled, obviously, to have Reg on as well. I'll just start sharing my screen as well, and hopefully that starts coming through now. So we're really excited to take you through what's hopefully an engaging and informative discussion around nearshoring, reshoring, friendshoring, and some of the trends around the regionalization of supply chain in North America. We'll start things off by going through a little bit of an introduction on CartonCloud, what we do, where we come from, and Reg will do the same for Techdinamics. Then we'll provide a little bit of background on what's actually been sort of driving these trends. Some of this will obviously be a refresher from things that we've been seeing a lot in the supply chain, and hopefully some interesting sort of insights into where this trend is up to and what the sort of forward-looking outlook is for the logistics industry specifically, but what this might mean in terms of the demand for logistics services over the next few years in North America. Before we jump into exploring a case study that we were very fortunate to be able to help a client with, jumping through a real-world example of an opportunity that arose for a 3PL client of ours to capitalize on this nearshoring trend and actually deliver a really great outcome to their client, but also open up a whole new revenue stream for their business as well. And we'll drive through what that looked like, both from the warehousing perspective, but also crucially the integration perspective as well, and hopefully give you some insights into what that looked like before obviously giving you all a chance to ask any questions that you have at the end. So we'll get stuck into it. By way of a bit of background, so I'm the CEO of CartonCloud. We're a cloud-based WMS and TMS company that's focused on really servicing the small to medium businesses in the logistics industry. We've got staff all across North America and Asia Pacific, and our customers use a combination of either our WMS or our TMS or both systems. So there's some flexibility there in terms of how we can help out our typical clients. Our focus is on ease of use and yet obviously powerful software that helps our customers grow their business. So this nearshoring trend is something that we've seen come up a lot in our sales pipeline, our existing customer discussions, as new opportunities are kind of presenting themselves in new and interesting ways. We obviously have what I believe is a fantastic software application, but we also focus on the implementation and customer support that goes along with that. And our entire team comes from a logistics operation background. That's something that's really important to us to make sure that we can help our customers navigate these challenges, being valuable sounding boards, but also understanding their questions so we can help them in the best possible way. And as a business, we believe in a couple of things, but transparency and partnerships and collaboration are top of those. And we've been thrilled to work with Techdinamics on this project and a few others. And I will pass it over to you, Reg, to introduce Techdinamics.
Well, thank you, Sean. It's a pleasure to be here today. And again, thank everyone for taking the time out of their day. For those of you that don't know Techdinamics, I'm Reg Adams, President of Techdinamics. And we're a tech stack. We actually do business with hundreds and hundreds of fulfillment centers worldwide. Globally from a standpoint, but we have several products that will help the WMS or the ERPs give the customer a better solution from that standpoint. Just to touch on a couple here on this slide, we have a product called TechOMS. We'll come back to integrated flow in a minute because that's part of today's discussion. a Tech OMS, which is an OMS system where we can connect multiple. If you're a 3PL, you could have 80 different customers in your building, and maybe each one of those customers has 5 or 10 different order sources. So our tool is designed to help the 3PL plug in with all those customers, all those different order sources, whether it's Amazon, Walmart Marketplace, EDI, automotive, it doesn't matter. We can plug into the Tech OMS and give one source for all the customers. Our flagship product is TechShip, which is a shipping solution, bolts on the back up, fully integrated to the WMS and ERP, and bolts on the back of the WMS and helps you from an order processing, picking, processing, and shipping in the carrier selection process. It's what we call a scan and go process or a batch process where you can move very quickly and create your carrier labels all in one scan. On top of TechShip, we have a product it's about consumer awareness, customer awareness now. It's TechTrack. So basically anything that the warehouse is doing, you can track and trace those shipments regardless of which carrier it's on, globally or worldwide, small parcel or LTL carriers. And so it gives that visibility back to your customers, which you can white label and brand it for your own 3PL if you want. And then Tech Audit is just simply a labor savings for you. We have customers that may ship 1,000 orders in a day, and we have customers that will ship 1,000,000 orders in a month. So obviously auditing the carrier experience is something that it's very time consuming, and so Tech Audit helps you plug in their bills and audit against what should have been paid or what should have been charged versus the exceptions, and spits out the reports. Integrated flow is what we're talking about today with the CartonCloud experience we did on this use case. And this is basically connecting any system to any system worldwide. We really don't care what system a customer is. In this case, we were on a NetSuite configuration connecting to APIs, or you can be EDI to file-based. It doesn't matter. It will connect any system to any system and do it quickly. So that's the advantage of using integrated flow. So Sean, that kind of gives you a good idea. Why don't we walk the team through the experience we had?
Fantastic, and thanks very much for giving us the patience of giving an introduction. We were really excited to talk about nearshoring, obviously because it's really prominent in the headlines. It's been a bit of a buzz term, but also I think Reg and I were both excited to just be able to talk about something than e-commerce for a couple of minutes as well. So we wanted to help set the context of what our respective organizations do. We are not specifically in nearshoring. It's just this is something that we both find very interesting, that's presented some really exciting opportunities for logistics companies to expand on their B2B service offerings. So hopefully, again, we're just providing a different lens point here. But yeah, obviously, we've got a whole bunch of different things that we work on in our backgrounds. So as I mentioned, nearshoring, reshoring, onshoring, friendshoring, these have all been very prominent trends over the last few years. And Bloomberg cited that there's been a 216% increase in mentions of nearshoring, reshoring, and onshoring by American firms since the beginning of 2022. Obviously, a lot of these were triggered by some of the, I guess, fragility in supply chains that were highlighted during pandemic and other external shocks to supply chains from 2019 to 2023. And that's really driven a huge increase in investment. So there's been a total of $516 billion invested in onshoring and nearshoring projects that have been announced by private companies in North America since the last presidential election. We're going to start off the discussion by just doing a refresher on what these terms mean, what drove these changes, and then what that might mean for logistics and warehouses going forward. So I almost wish that we could bundle these terms together and just call it X-shoring, because there's a little bit of connective tissue between these different phrases. Just by way of a little bit of context setting, when we're talking about reshoring, these tends to be production and manufacturing activities that are bringing production back to the domestic country where goods are traditionally sold. So production that was maybe outsourced from the US to China, reshoring and returning to the US, now usually due to reducing costs, improving quality control, security, job creation, lead times, and those sorts of factors. Nearshoring is shifting that production and manufacturing to countries that are closer to those original. And typically, we're talking about the US, Canada, Mexico when we're talking about nearshoring. And that obviously is still a similar outsourcing of production to a potentially lower cost country, but really reducing those lead times and the distances between those two sort of the points of manufacture and the point of consumption. And then the final one that sort of gets bundled into here is also the friendshoring trade, which is really moving manufacturing and sourcing of components to countries that are considered lower political and economic risks. So those might be countries, obviously, in North and Central America. It might include some European partners with strong ties to North America. But it's another element that's driving this change of shifting supply chains, whether that's regionalization, de-risking, shortening supply chains. And that last factor there around friendshoring is really being driven by geopolitical tensions and sort of national security and supply chain security considerations. So all of these trends have overlapping and connective tissue, and we'll be kind of looking at what those are likely to have as an impact for the logistics industry here. One of the big key pieces that have facilitated this trend, though, is the USMCA agreement, which really encourages this nearshoring, reshoring trend towards Canada, US, and Mexico. So it's broken down a lot of the trade barriers and really encouraged that trend to accelerate over the last few years, to the point that trade between those three countries is growing in double-digit percentages every year and reached an astonishing $1.7 trillion in 2023. And there's no sign that it's going to be slowing down. And this has obviously added an additional kind of tailwind, but the reality is these trends are only just getting started, and they've been being talked about for quite a long time, but we finally reached a position in the last few years that really saw these nearshoring and reshoring trends actually start to pick up some momentum. I don't really want to go back over sort of ancient history, or it feels like it should be ancient history now, but it really was the pandemic that sort of was the final kind of straw that broke the camel's back, that saw the momentum really kind of build for these sort of exshoring trends to bring goods closer to the final destination. We obviously saw some incredible backlogs, port congestions, workforce interruptions, border closures that highlighted what had probably been sitting on people's risk registers as considerations in their supply chain, but all of a sudden the risks became reality and it caused action. And that obviously combined with a huge increase in demand to really exacerbate the problems for the entire supply chain. In addition to that, we had not just the pandemic, but we had geopolitical risks that again had been simmering away start to really kind of accelerate, and that included key manufacturing areas like China and the desire to reduce the reliance on the economy in Asia, specifically around industries like semiconductors, but also conflict in Eastern Europe around the Ukraine-Russia conflict. We've seen recent examples with Yemen disrupting shipping lines from Asia to Europe, have really highlighted the need to regionalize supply chains. And with the structure of the North American logistics landscape, it really lends itself well to this nearshoring and reshoring activity. It's well set up to be supported by road, rail, land transport, and so bringing the production closer has been sort of getting tailwinds by the infrastructure that we've got in place. It's also driven huge increases in foreign direct investment, specifically in these regions, which in 2023 saw $330 billion in the US, $49 billion in Canada, and $43 billion in Mexico. So although we talk about nearshoring in Mexico and Canada being big trends, the majority of the investment still actually continues to be into reshoring and bringing those production and manufacturing sites directly into the US. Deloitte ran a survey called The Future of Freight in 2022, which really highlighted the strength of the sentiment in the industry around this reshaping trend. This isn't just something that the economists are talking about. This is something that's really believed by both transportation and logistics providers and the manufacturing sector themselves. Pretty much across everyone that was surveyed, there was an expectation that some, or if not all, of this manufacturing was going to be brought back into the Central and North American market. So there's a fairly good spread in terms of where they expected this to be playing out, both in South and Central America. Canada and Mexico are obviously very, very prominent, but the most prominent continues to be US, with that reassuring trend to bring production domestically. And geographically within the US, there was a pretty good spread of where they expect this to play out. And based on the industries that have started to capitalize on this, we've probably seen some regions that have seen more activity in this space, but there's a fairly strong expectation from the industry that we'll see this affect a lot of the country. In terms of the scale that we're talking about here, these executives were also quizzed on what percentage of their freight that they are currently receiving from Asia or Asia originating freight they expect to move to closer proximity markets. And a lot of these respondents expected this to already be making a pretty material impact in 2025, but getting up over 40% by the end of the decade. And manufacturers' expectations were actually greater than the transportation providers, and 62% of them said that they had already begun the process of reshoring or nearshoring in their supply chains, which just goes to show just the scale at which we can reasonably expect to see additional freight and additional logistics activities coming into the domestic or the North American markets. Even if the rates happened at half of this, it would still represent a pretty radical change, which is going to create some really new and exciting opportunities for both established logistics providers, but also new competitors to either enter the market or enter new segments and services within that market. And this isn't just talk or futuristic kind of buzzwords around what we're going to see in the market. This is happening today. This chart on the left here shows the share of US imports by country of origin and highlights that we are already seeing this play out in terms of the increase in Mexico and Canada as a percentage of US imports, but a dramatic decrease in reliance on China. These, as you can tell from this data, it can be a little bit lumpy and spiky, and it also is only talking about US imports, so therefore ignoring some of the production we've already seen shift to US markets. But it shows that even in 2023, as some of this production is starting to come online, it's materially impacting the share of both both Canada and Mexico as part of US imports, but we're seeing a pretty significant decrease in China. The industries that have made the most progress so far, and this is by no means to say these will be the only industries that make progress on this topic over the next 5 to 10 years, but we've obviously seen semiconductors be a really big source of investment. The US government committed $52 billion to support domestic chip manufacturing through the CHIPS Act. And this is a very long lead time investment, but will undoubtedly really reshape that global chip market. And this was largely driven, obviously, by the vulnerabilities that were in those supply chains and relying on an Asian production of semiconductors. The one where I think we've seen the most prominent examples start to sort of drive real opportunities for customers, and the case study that we'll be focusing on today was within the automotive sector. So again, we saw the pandemic and geopolitical tensions disrupt the industry and had a very complex supply chain, which saw production slow down. And the automotive makers are looking to really bring those production facilities back into the US, typically with Ford and GM, really increasing their investment in electric vehicle production, both in North America and Mexico. And that's been a really prominent industry that's sort of already started to sort of reshape itself in response to those external challenges. Healthcare and pharmaceuticals, electronics, and metals and mining are the other three industries that have already started to make some pretty significant investments in this shape, and are very likely to be some of the next areas that we see this trend really start to pick up traction and emerge in the domestic markets. And they have again been driven by disruptions, risk, geopolitical tensions, or just national security interest and the desire to bring that to have that domestic control over those industries.
I think that's interesting, Sean, because you're talking about the different industries coming in. What we've seen is really we have a huge number of fulfillment centers, 3PLs, that maybe have been located in the US or maybe have been located in just Canada or Mexico. And they're now expanding to increase operations in all three countries. The NAFTA agreement has changed things dramatically between trade of certain types of commodities and products across Canada, US, and across North America. And depending on the commodity, it may be better for them to bring those raw materials or those vendor parts of those materials into Mexico and then import them into, because the taxes and duties coming into Mexico will be less than say coming into the US for that commodity. And there is no taxes and duties in Mexico if it's for export into either US or Canada, or vice versa. It's coming into Canada and then being dropped down into the US from on the nearshoring standpoint. So, and then US into Canada and vice versa. So the process is really interesting. The customers have had to take a look at all aspects of the cost inbound from Asia or Europe, best location to bring them into, cost of bringing it into, the cost of duties initially coming into a given country. We have one particular one. They'd kill us if we named them, so we can't name them, but they had a taxable duty of like 27% coming into the United States, where it was only 4% coming into Canada. And then under the NAFTA agreement, they were able to ship the product from Canada. No taxes paid in Canada because exporting into US and Mexico. And under the NAFTA agreement, it came in tax-free for them. So they saved a huge savings. So there's a lot of interesting models that are happening with different industries. And, you know, you have these main ones happening, but we're even seeing trends right now, even back to the clothing days and fabric materials and different things like that coming in for with different costs related for taxes and duties. So this has become a very dynamic model, and we have some very small and large 3PLs looking at now locating in all three zones where maybe they were only in one before.
Yeah, absolutely. And we've seen the same thing. We've had sort of opportunities and sort of customer requirements that have come up that have been sort of very specific warehousing requirements to take advantage of these, you know, duty and like essentially duty arbitrage opportunities, and setting up very specific sites, whether they're bonded or FTZ or whatever the sort of requirements are, which has been really interesting to work through those requirements as well. Unfortunately, the case study we have is a little bit simpler than that, but I think we could always try and do a separate one on the duties and tariffs at a later date. So to kind of really to wrap that up before we I promise move into the real world case study, really just, you know, summarizing this is that this global investment in North America and nearshoring is going to continue to open up new opportunities. Reg has done a fantastic job of mentioning a few of the others here. We're going to take you through a case study that was to do with the automotive industry and sort of the reshoring and nearshoring of electric vehicle manufacturing in sort of the Midwest. The other thing that's really important to note is, as I mentioned earlier, it takes 5 to 10 years to play out. The massive increase investment that we've seen in the last couple of years is realistically going to take 5, 6, 7, 8 years until some of those facilities are actually starting to produce. And that's going to mean that this is going to continue to grow. It also takes these businesses that are deciding to reduce their reliance on China quite a few years to potentially work through that. There are complexities for these organizations that are exiting China to ensure that they can, you know, protect their IP, maintain any sort of like existing production orders, protect their inventory, and do that in the right way so that they're not closing down China as a future option for them. So we're going to see this continue to gather steam as we move forward. And there are always going to be goods and elements of the supply chain that are going to make sense to produce offshore, whether it's due to specialization of skills or equipment, access to raw materials, economies of scales, or just simply cost. We're still going to be having this, you know, having this reliance on foreign countries. It's just that rather than bringing in finished goods, it's very likely to start to produce components and elements of supply chain as we do more manufacturing and finalization in North America. And that will mean supply chains are going to become more complex during this period. But undoubtedly, no matter really which way you slice it, the nearshoring trend is going to lead to a high demand for warehousing, trucking, rail, and all other sort of services in North America. I think it's a very exciting time to sort of be part of the industry. So now that we sort of switched to that sort of 3PL case study that we promised at the start, you know, we really wanted to emphasize that there's an opportunity here to bring on the right expertise to help manage the complexity of these international workflows. Reg and his team are obviously very knowledgeable on the integration requirements and also the various sort of considerations when we're setting up sites across not just Mexico, US, and Canada, but also when we're sort of working in with foreign suppliers as part of that. The focus on agility and flexibility is really going to be the key for 3PLs to capitalize on those opportunities and be part of these more complex supply chains, and obviously making sure you have the right support and tech partners around you to ensure that initial and ongoing success for you and your clients in these opportunities. So we'll jump across to the case study, this case study is for a client of ours who had the opportunity to capitalize on a requirement for one of their partners to set up basically a new 3PL warehouse and freight consolidation facility in the Midwest. And this was as this partner of theirs, who is a supplier into the automotive industry, was being part of and going through this nearshoring and reshoring trend. So the requirement here that when we sort of started working with this client was to set up this 3PL warehouse and freight consolidation in Michigan, and was going to be receiving EV batteries for distribution to North America. And this was because we were starting to produce a lot more vehicles in the region, but that certainly the battery tech at this time still required import from a foreign supplier. So it had a very complex set of requirements, or a fairly complex set of requirements, but the number one thing that it had was a very tight time frame. They needed to be able to get this customer to sort of give them the business. They needed to be able to deliver all of this in about 6 weeks. And all of this included an integration into a tier 1 ERP system that spanned across multiple time zones, including international complexity with documents and workflows. They had some very specific requirements on labeling documentation for both inbound and outbound. There was a fairly robust QC, or quality control, process for the products as they were to be handled through the warehouse. Some quite detailed requirements around serial numbers, and with a fairly heavy product, it also meant that they wanted to also incorporate some flexibility to enable their operations staff to be able to fulfill that as seamlessly as possible. Quite a few workflow and reporting requirements for both the 3PL and the customer. And then on the dispatch side of things, there was some integration requirements and some labeling and documentation for the receiver and the various receivers of the freight. So what did this look like? When they approached us, we, as a WMS provider, were obviously very focused on the warehousing piece, but there was this enormous other part of the project, which in a 6-week time frame was really important for us to bring on the right additional partners to kind of get the best outcome for the customer. And that's where Reg and his team at Techdinamics was able to kind of take that, which allowed both businesses to work in parallel so that we could really achieve that 6-week time frame from woe to go for a business that was also entering into a new type of service offering for their customer. They did not have a lot of experience in this space, especially for this type of product. So we engaged with Techdinamics, introduced them to the client, and we then basically went through the process of working through this with the customer. And that started off with setting up the initial configuration in the warehousing system, customizing some of these workflows and templates, setting up some of these automation rules so that we could test them as the integration started. Reg will jump in now and take you through what that integration process looked like and what's involved in that for Techdinamics and the customer. But they were then able to go through that integration in parallel with the warehouse sort of implementation and training, manage the global stakeholders that were involved in that project, and then scope, build, and test that integration all within the customer's timeframes and budgets. Finally, we were able to then finalize the testing and the workflows before completing the training for the team that was going to be doing the transactions within a week, and be fully live and operational with everything within 6 weeks. So something that was a very fun project to be involved in, and I don't think that there would have been any way of hitting those timeframes without bringing on the right tech partners to enable them to hit and exceed their customer expectations. So Reg, I'll pass it over to you to go through the Techdinamics part of that before I bring it back to the WMS in a bit more detail.
Yeah, and maybe we have to take just a high level snapshot for the audience to be able to understand what was actually happening. Think of an automotive customers in North America buying parts from Asia. The Asian ERP had to receive all the orders. The Asian ERP then they moved stock nearshoring into the US, and also now going into Mexico. They're doing the same thing for Europe. So they had to get the product closer to the production lines from that standpoint, from the automotive demand standpoint of being able to deliver within a certain window. And so those orders then transferred up to the WMS level, and from WMS, pick, process, and ship. And then all that had to be reversed, and that data had to go back to the ERP. In that one particular case, one was in NetSuite, the other one is SAP, and back to the ERP systems. Mark them, check them off as tags, received, fulfilled, shipped, delivered. Here's your ASNs going out the door, and then updating the end automotive manufacturer with all that data as well. So there was a very complex set of documentation that went between each one of the processes. And and then on top of that, we had to turn around and we always talk about the perfect order process. And Sean and the team were able to work with us. We were able to put together everybody working in their own formats. And what I mean by that, you're not trying to convert NetSuite to a file-based system. That the Chinese customer and the ERP was receiving EDI from automotive and wanted to send out documentation in EDI format. But on the WMS side, we converted EDI to API and received the products in it via API, pick, pack, and ship, and then took API and converted it back. So we kept everybody for the essence of speed. If you expect all parties, in this case there was 4 of them, you expect all parties to be able to change to your formats, it's not going to work. We never would have been able to do this in this sort of time frame or this window. And so when we say perfect order process, we're talking about giving everybody the appropriate information in their format, populating their systems, and they don't have to do anything. It's seamless. It's just arrives, it's there, they can run reports, they can process and go. So it was a lot of work in a short window, as Sean pointed out. But we did manage to get everybody converted into their own formats and to be able to process orders in a timely fashion, update them, and all 3 ends were ecstatic at the end that it happened that fast. Well, as a matter of fact, one of the groups, and compliments to the WMS as well, but one of the groups came to us and said, we have a similar project that we started in Europe. Can you guys consider taking that over? They were like, I believe it was 20 weeks into it and still hadn't had the project done, Sean. So hats off to both teams of being able to accomplish and get the customer's job done here from that standpoint. I think that one of the things, just to kind of give you a little bit of explanation on the complexity, and it's about transformation of the integration. And so this is where we talk about, when I reference the perfect order, we just touched on the type of, you've got multiple customers coming into the ERP systems, and it's multiple ERP with multiple locations, fulfilling back to the WMS. And the WMS, the warehouse management system, as Sean pointed out, we talked about, we could be in this case was the US, but also now the facility being added in Canada, for the electric vehicles being built up there, and then a facility being added in Mexico, additional facilities in Mexico. And each one of those facilities are talking a different language. And so the conversion of the transformation and the integration was, I think, what helped us be successful in getting this applied and done quickly from that standpoint. Make sense, Sean?
Absolutely. Yeah, absolutely.
And then the biggest thing is we threw this slide up there just for a specific reason, not just to show that, you have people in Europe, we have people in South America, we have people in Asia, and people obviously in North America, but this is chasing the sun. And when you're talking nearshoring, you're talking about people in multiple continents trying to work together. There's always the support side of things. And as you can appreciate in automotive, as we were doing in this case study, if you're down, if you're missing something, if you don't have documents traveling and getting to them in a timely fashion, there's severe penalties and fines from that standpoint. Or if your ASN documentation is not to them in time for their shipments and or correctly from that standpoint. So we were able to bring the multiple offices together on the same integration platform and be able to let them look at all the orders being processed from that standpoint. So it became a large support, and now it just automatically runs. It's there, it's up and going, and it just automatically runs. So if there's an order or a SKU or a QC audit check they have to have that didn't happen at WMS level, there's an alert process that says, hey, we're missing this, and boom, someone can follow up on it. So I think it's a matter of we had a lot of pieces to put together there, but I think it came off very well, Sean, and kudos to your team for the work that was done.
Absolutely, and from our side, being able to leverage the Techdinamics partnership for this particular client meant that whilst we were focusing on what was happening on the right-hand side of this diagram, we were able to generate what was essentially a very cookie cutter solution that was perfectly suited to what needed to happen inside the four walls of the facility, while Techdinamics was able to then take care of these mappings as we then, look at additional facilities in Mexico and Canada. Makes that rollout process very, very straightforward by having those two sort of complementary parts working together. On the WMS piece, from our side, this was also a very complex project for us. So Reg mentioned a lot of the data and the formats that were at play and the ASNs and the communications back. For this particular case study, where there was some fairly bespoke requirements, including multiple references or kind of codes for single SKUs, and the need to I think they need to track up to 7 additional attributes against each individual product that was in the warehouse. So that really took advantage of a lot of the flexibility that we had in the system to kind of cater for those. Already mentioned, and Reg just mentioned, there was some very specific and very important requirements around documentation, labels, both obviously for inbound and outbound, but through the tight integration that we're able to deliver with Techdinamics, there was a really smooth workflow we were able to deliver on the floor that enabled the facility to essentially take advantage of the existing labels on the batteries to confirm products, ensure that they were validating those sort of unique references and serial numbers on the way in, and then trigger the printing of that specific label that needed to apply to that battery as part of receiving. And that tight integration, that sort of flexibility to use the existing reference really sped up that inbound and improved the accuracy of that process. There was some nice automation that included sort of return messaging to obviously to Techdinamics and subsequently to the ERP systems as well, where we're able to use some automation rules that we could configure in the background to basically manage that QC process just through relatively simple prompts and sort of moves of product in the warehouse, which included, as Reg mentioned, some safeguards and some alerts when things didn't go right, so that intervention could happen nice and quickly before something got missed that caused problems down the line. And obviously for us as a 3PL warehouse, the other key part for the customer here was capturing all of capturing the calculation of all of those charges. And that was obviously a key part for these guys to make sure that they made money out of this operation as well. One of the more unique or bespoke parts of this was a part of our sort of functionality that we refer to as reallocation. And as we're dealing with car batteries here that obviously were individually serialized, but they're individually also quite heavy, only being sort of able to be stacked three per pallet, was this desire from the warehouse to be able to cater for multiple scenarios from these outbound orders, which might specify a serial number, a production date, or just revert back to first in, first out kind of stock allocation. And they had a combination of locations on the floor that were both racked and bulk locations. And what we were able to do here was basically allow, through some configuration of the application that's all sort of done through the web application, to highlight to the users when a specific barcode, when a specific serial number or production date had been requested, or when they were able to actually substitute that for another stock that had matching conditions as that particular battery. And that was really important for especially their floor stacked areas where specific products hadn't been requested, but they could see that they had an entire row of the same production date or the same arrival date. and allowing the user to basically both verify and validate the serial number that they were picking as part of the outbound process, ensure that it matched the stock selection criteria that we'd been provided from Techdinamics, but not have to necessarily go and get a forklift to move and restack a whole row of batteries, but basically to be able to have that flexibility to sort of replace that stock and enable them to keep going, get more orders done, while still making sure that they were adhering to all of the stock control that they had implemented for their customers. So this was a really, this was something that we already had in the application that was able to be utilized in this scenario to enable them to not just be able to meet the customer expectations, but do it without having to go and put any super strict processes around their operations as well to slow them down. From the outset with us, similar to sort of Regis, everything that was done from our side, at least on the warehousing side, required no development involvement. So that's something we're very proud of. To be able to turn that around within 6 weeks with no development involvement from our side was a really big win for us. And I think that ability to have the flexibility in the application already to cater for all of their product attribute trackings, but also to match the operational workflows with the customer requirements was what actually enabled us to get that outcome in that sort of a time frame. Also, the ability to obviously work nicely with others is key, and that was the number one thing here. But what did this mean for the customer? Their customer, our client was able to go from zero to finished in 6 weeks, including integrations into multiple tier 1 ERP systems. But it didn't just stop there. Reg has already mentioned that they've been able to utilize that model to roll out in additional sites in US and Canada, but they've also, in this particular site, now that they had set up this operation so quickly, have brought on 5 additional customers with different profiles going forward. And this again kind of goes back to the need for flexibility and sort of, I guess, adaptability in the supply chain, because those additional customers had different attributes. It wasn't specific to automotive. And having the combined experience of CartonCloud and Techdinamics has allowed them to do a whole range of things within 6 months in a site that they had never really contemplated setting up. And that has allowed them to grow their business, diversify their revenue streams, and take advantage of whatever opportunities are being presented to them. So Reg, I don't know if you want to add anything else to that before we sort of throw it over to questions.
No, I think you did a great job there, Sean. The key was, obviously the rush in the beginning was to get customer 1 up and going, and that was the big crunch, because normally a project like this is not done in 6 weeks, right? From that standpoint, and so the big rush to do it. But all along the way, the conversations between the warehouse system and the integration system, they were talking about scoping and the next customers that were going to have to come along the way. So nothing got to that it was at a point where it was so fixed and rigid that we couldn't be sharing a multiple of different attributes for other customers and being able to accomplish different things for the other customers at the same time. And I think that's where the excitement came from the customer standpoint, is that the flexibility of being able to just tweak one thing for customer A, or I should say tweak one thing for customer B a little bit different than A, and was done and can be done very quickly from that standpoint. So I gotta say congrats to the WMS from being able to apply those different rules and order management setups. But then also we were able to get that data and be able to pass it along and convert it back to each and every platform a little bit differently based off their requirements, right, from that standpoint. So it was very exciting. It was a great project, and quite frankly, we look forward to doing many more.
Absolutely. I think the customer is exceedingly happy at this stage. So fingers crossed they stay that way. That's the that's the end of the presentation from Reg and I. There's a Q&A option within the webinar. So please, if you have some questions, shoot them through. And Bennett, obviously, feel free to add anything to that as well. I don't know if there's anything else that you would like us to do, please let us know.
Sure, gentlemen, I just want to say thank you for that great presentation. As Sean said, the floor is open for any questions. If you want to submit them via the Q&A button, we will address them. If your question is not addressed, or if you come up with something afterwards, you can email your question to education@iwla.com, and we'll make sure the speakers get the questions. So, all right, well, let's give it a minute here or so. If anybody has a question, we'll take them.
It looks like you did a very good job explaining all that.
I was about to say the same to you, Reg. That's probably the first time we've been able to talk about multiple ERP integrations with no questions. So I'll bring you on to our next sales call again.
Well, I guess if there are no questions, gentlemen, if you have no more to add, we'll go ahead and close. As I said, we will conclude, but if you come up with questions afterwards and want to email us at education@iwla.com, we'll make sure the speakers get them. So thanks again. We want to thank everyone for attending today. You'll receive a copy of the link to the video, for the PowerPoint presentation, the video of the presentation. We'll get that out by the end of the week. And with that, I guess I just want to thank everyone for joining us, and have a great rest of your day.